I think we're good to go. All right. Thanks for sticking around, everybody. Welcome to the very first sort of roundtable session from the venture folks. Just spend a minute about TVF, right? If you're not aware already, TVS is sort of this collective of sort of analysts and associates from the venture capital industry. We're quite a thriving community on Slack and on WhatsApp. We also have a product called Gateway, which is intended for people that are looking to break into VC, right? So if you haven't already, please do join that. If you're having issues joining either of those platforms, just reach out to us. We're fairly accessible pretty much everywhere. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Um, the reason behind we're doing this session is, really climate tech is a personal sort of affinity of mine, right? It's also been picking up a lot of speed in investment climate recently, right? And so we're just going to try and do a sort of a 20 plus 10 session. I'll just try to brief everybody about climate tech. This is intended both for people who don't know much about climate tech and also for people who may have a little bit of flavor of it already. Please feel free to ask any questions if you have. I'm going to try and take them proactively or at the end if time permits. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so before climate tech, we need to talk about climate change, right? Essentially, climate change is like this brother of global warming, which evolved over time, right? Nobody really knows when we stopped calling it global warming and when we started calling it climate change, right? So the definition really is that climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns. Important to know that it's primarily caused by human intervention or human activities, right? Essentially, what it is that essentially what it is that a long period of time has passed by where a lot of human activities have gone by, and it's significantly affected our climate. Some of you may ask, but isn't the weather always changing? Isn't the climate always changing? And the major differentiator there is that weather and climate are not the same thing. You have a weather app on your phone, you don't have a climate app on your phone, right? That doesn't really exist. So weather is a precursor and primary determinant of climate. And think of it as this way, right? Weather is short term, and climate is a combination of weather short term in that long term, right? So weather short term, climate long term. Weather represents conditions of the atmosphere over a short period of time, and climate represents over a long period of time. Now, another valid question to ask is, well, the world has really been going through cooling and warming sessions, right, throughout its history, and that's true. But it's really only been over the last 100, 200 years where human intervention has caused a change in our climate in that short amount of time, right? So cooling and warming periods of Earth have happened over tens and thousands of years, not over 200 years. And the battle really is to try and not reach a warming of a state where we're 1.5 degrees warmer, right? And if you just look at this graph a little bit, human influence has already made sure that we're about zero 0.8 degrees Celsius warmer, right? And it might not sound a lot, but it really has catastrophic implications everywhere, right? 0.8-degree warmer means the glaciers sort of warm more quickly, and really just has the potential to, have catastrophic weather events happening all across the world, right? If you've been aware of the situation that's happened in Pakistan or in Bangladesh, um, we are very susceptible as Indian subcontinent. We are very susceptible to climate change, right? And the severe weather conditions that follow climate change. Um, so it's really just that. All right. Now, you might have heard this entire spiel around clean tech and climate tech, right? And a lot of people use that term interchangeably, and frankly, they're not the same thing. Um, Clean tech and climate tech differ in a lot of ways. They're also quite similar, but they really also differ in a lot of ways, right? So I'm just going to read a couple of definitions for all of us. Climate tech is defined as business models and technologies that mitigate the impact or drivers of greenhouse gas emissions, right? Essentially, what it is climate technologies are those that reduce the impact of GHGs in the environment and are directly responsible for reducing the amount of carbon there is in the atmosphere, right? Because carbon is really what's sort of keeping us in this bubble and keeping it really sort of creating that warming environment, right? Clean tech is really not that. Um, Clean tech is anything and everything around environment tech, right? And it may not necessarily lead to reduction of carbon as its North Star metric, unlike climate tech. So it's very important to make that distinction. Perhaps agri models increasing yield do not necessarily reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And so it's very important to make that distinction. So yes, today a lot of clean tech and climate tech is said interchangeably, but it's really they're two very sort of different. At the same time, they're very similar as well. Talking of timelines, right? Clean Tech 1.0 versus Climate Tech 2.0. Clean Tech was really a phase in, perhaps 10 to 12, 15 years ago, where a significant amount of money was shelled into solar wind projects and wind turbines and stuff like that, right? A lot of hardware focused companies, really. This was, as you can already tell, this was also a period where the financial crisis has happened. And so uh, a lot of money was lost. Nearly 50% of capital, which was invested in what was being called clean tech back then, was lost, right? And so the VC dilemma really begins from that, right? Because a lot of people lost a lot of money back in the day. But climate tech has really recently just made a resurgence from clean tech, right? Um, I think somewhere between 2019 and 2021, perhaps due to the pandemic or otherwise, there was a lot of capital was available at a low cost to it, and essentially, climate tech benefits from an atmosphere or an ecosystem where the cost to capital is lower, and so it did result in a lot of SPACs. It did result in a lot of technology first businesses, unlike clean tech, which was a lot of it was hardware. Clean tech did result in significant movements towards mobility or renewable energy and stuff like that. But there were also a lot of things that didn't work out, right? It's also very important to understand that the type of technologies that we're talking about have a long gestation period. So any bets that are made into the ecosystem are not your quick fix sort of 3 to 5 year bets. They're more around plus 10 years, right? So there's also this need to recalibrate the expectation that potential investment into clean tech or climate tech will have. Although, yes, the hope is that climate tech will have a shorter gestation period, but that's really just a hypothesis, right? But the stage is sort of set for climate tech to sort of take over. Yeah, so this is actually very interesting. This is a graph which was, from Clean Energy Ventures, which is I think a VC based out of US or Canada. I'm not sure. It really just summarizes what I was talking about, right? There are sectors that are within clean tech, and there are sectors that are exclusively within climate tech, right? So very important to note, carbon capture is exclusively a climate tech subsector. So as these others, right? Because all of these are focusing on reducing GHG, the impact of GHG emissions into the atmosphere. Sure, there is going to be a lot of overlap, and transportation or supply chain really taken that mobility aspect out of both clean tech and climate tech, but a lot of these others, wastage or recycling or clean water, um, are inherently clean tech subsectors and not necessarily climate tech. All right. Okay. So let's talk about the Indian narrative, right? Um, as you can already probably see, history of climate tech funding in India has been beyond dismal, right? It's just been ridiculously poor. A lot of this capital that you see over here, or even 2022, a lot of this really goes to mobility, and it's hard to really the lines get blurred when mobility and transport and logistics ventures get funded on the premise of being climate tech companies, but really the amount invested has been quite poor. Think about it this way. I think roughly $40 billion was invested at least in the VC ecosystem in 2021, and this is what presents roughly 1% of it went to climate tech, right? Although it is picking up steam in 2022 and perhaps in the years to follow. We're setting a good precedent, but we're nowhere close to what mature markets are doing, right? I think please don't quote me on this. I think the US spends anywhere between 35 to billion dollars a year on climate technologies, right? VC dollars in a year. I think Europe is something similar. China is not too far behind as well. All right, so this is just sort of the taxonomy of areas that are picking up speed, right? Yes, mobility, as you can see, does take in the lion's share here, but renewable energy is also quite significant, and agri also plays quite a big part. So the entire bit of it are emerging areas within climate tech. They're obviously not subsectors. I would consider them more as practice areas within climate tech that are picking up speed. And guys, so this deck is going to be made available later on, so don't worry about the slides. Yeah, so this is the breakup of deals that's happened over a period of time, right? Between the last 2 years. A lot of this capital, as you can see, was invested. A lot of the quantum was invested in late stage, although the number of deals in lower stage were higher, right? So few deals in the later stage, sort of early to growth stage, more deals in the very early stage. But of course, the capital invested is incomparable, right? So I think I think it's valid to say that a lot of this capital should resonate somewhere here as well. But as you can see, the image is a little lopsided because climate tech is inherently a risky asset class, right? So I think that gives you that. Okay, so I think this was a graph that I picked from Unitas Capital, if I'm not wrong. They estimated climate finance requirements to be by 2030 to be about 1 trillion. Right, that sounds like a lot. It is. Important to know this is not just. I don't assume this to just be VC dollars, right? I think it's a combination of debt, grants, government funding, etc. But really, the level of funding required to ensure that we're not reaching that 1.5 degrees Celsius number, which will permanently damage our climate, the work's really cut out for us with this number, right? Yeah. Okay, so I kind of want to just talk about the broken window fallacy. So the broken window fallacy was essentially an essay which was written by this French economist. I think his name was Frédéric Bastiat. Okay, so imagine there's a store. You're a store owner. And you have a child, and essentially the child breaks the window of the store, right? Now, of course, a broken window is bad for business, right? Now, the store owner has the option to repair the window by paying a repairman with money, right? Now, this is a great scenario for the repairman because he can then take that money and spend it on, I don't know, bread that this person needs, or buy a glass of wine if he really wants to. So the money that's flown from the store owner has now gone to the repairman, has now gone to bread maker has now gone to the winemaker, right? And so that's sort of how the flow of money is worked. Another case is this guy really, the store owner doesn't really need to fix the window, right? It's probably too hot outside. Maybe it provides natural ventilation. He doesn't really need to fix the window. Instead, he takes the money that he was going to spend on the window, the broken window, and buys a glass of wine for himself, or buys a piece of bread for himself, right? Inherently following the same trajectory that the repairman would have followed. Now, think about it this way, right? This concept is really, I think we're all familiar with it. This concept is called opportunity cost, right? What is the value of the next highest alternative of doing things? In this scenario, the earth is the earth is a store, right? And we see that the store owners, right? We can choose to invest in the broken window, repair it, and then live a happier life thereon, or we can choose to invest in other mechanisms around us, right? Or other subsectors or sectors around us, right? And that's really how the dilemma should be foreseen, right? So there's a very high opportunity cost of not investing in climate tech, and there's also a high opportunity cost of investing in climate tech, right? Because you're letting go of all these other sectors that are picking up speed. Um, I think the narrative in India or even globally, honestly, nobody really knows what they're doing. But I think the narrative globally is such that at some point we need to recalibrate whether having a broken window is okay for us or not, right? As a species moving forward. Um, so that's basically it, guys. Uh, that's roughly it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Um, if you haven't already, please, feel free to join our Slack and WhatsApp channels as well. I'm going to stick around here for a bit. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay, I don't think anyone's got any questions. I'm gonna switch to one of the table rooms, or I think the lounge. Anybody wants to join me there? Happy to answer any questions. Thank you for those who attended. This particular presentation should be made available, later on. Okay, somebody does have a question. What are some of the white spaces in climate tech? Very broad question. I'll try to answer. White spaces, honestly, Utkarsh, I think one of the biggest white spaces is climate finance in itself, right? I'm not referencing climate finance as funding climate tech businesses. I think there are inherently a lack of financing solutions for climate tech, right? And a lot of innovation has not really flown into achieving benefits around climate tech. So there's inherently, so climate tech doesn't really have a Paytm for itself. Let me put it that way, right? Even today, if you wanted to invest in, your hard-earned money into some, I don't know, climate tech project, there are very few options for you to do so, right? You can go the whole traditional charity route, but that's obviously going to be, low transparency, and that's really just good for your conscience without knowing if it's really making a dent into climate. So there's a lack of transparency and climate finance. I'm personally, quite bullish on that as a subsector. Okay. Any other questions, guys? All right, guys. I think nobody has any questions. I'm just gonna head out to one of the rooms. Feel free to join me there. Thanks.